Some mothers cherish the sound of their children returning home. Martha Sullivan dreads the sound of her son's truck pulling into the driveway. Her son Dean blames her for the blindness that has taken her sight. Every day he grows angrier. Every day the beatings get worse. The neighbors hear everything but do nothing. Then one rainy evening, a rancher named Liam discovers the truth and offers Martha a choice that will change everything. Will this broken woman finally find the peace she deserves? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Montana wilderness stretched endlessly before the small farmhouse. A sea of golden wheat that whispered secrets too. The wind. Rugged mountains rose in the distance like ancient guardians, their peaks catching the first light of dawn. But inside the weathered cabin, Martha Sullivan knew no such beauty existed in her world anymore. She stood near the kitchen window, her fingers tracing the thin curtains that she could no longer see. The world had gone dark for her 3 years ago, when an accident took her sight but spared her life. Some days she wondered if it might have been kinder if the accident had taken everything. Martha had learned to navigate her small home through memory and touch. 15 steps from her bedroom to the kitchen. 7 steps to the back door. 4 steps to the rocking chair her late husband Thomas had made for her when they first moved to this remote corner of Montana 25 years ago. Every inch of this place lived in her mind, a map drawn by decades of routine and love. But that love had died alongside Thomas 2 years after her blindness began. Since then, her son Dean had transformed from the sweet boy she'd raised into something unrecognizable. Something cruel. Mother. Dean's voice cracked like a whip from the front room. Where's my dinner? It's almost 7. Martha's shoulders tensed involuntarily. She turned from the window and smoothed her faded dress, once blue, now washed. So many times it felt thin beneath her fingers. Her movements were practiced, careful, like a deer that had learned to move silently through predator territory. It's warming on the stove, she said softly, keeping her voice level. Arguing only made things worse. Dean Sullivan sat hunched over the rough wooden table, his thick hands wrapped around a bottle of whiskey. At 35, he was still a powerful man, his shoulders broad from years of ranch work. But there was something rotten in him now, something that had curdled like milk left too long in the sun. His dark hair was streaked with premature gray, and his eyes held the mean glint of a man who blamed the world for his disappointments. Warming ain't the same as ready, he muttered, not looking up. Can't even cook on time anymore. What good are you? The familiar word stung, but Martha had learned not to flinch visibly. She moved toward the stove with practiced precision, feeling for the pot of stew she'd prepared hours earlier. Her hands moved with automatic precision, while her mind drifted to safer places. She remembered Thomas's gentle laughter, the way he'd dance with her in this very kitchen to songs on their old radio. The way he'd described sunsets to her after. She lost her sight, painting pictures with words so vivid she could almost see them. That was before the cancer took him, before Dean had come back from the city, with bitterness seeping from him like poison. Sorry, she said, ladling the thick stew into a bowl. I lost track of time. Lost track, Dean scoffed. You've lost. Everything else might as well lose track of time too. Martha placed the bowl carefully on the table, finding its edge with her fingertips. The small victories of her day, not spilling, not dropping, not giving him another reason to lash out. She'd become an expert at navigating Dean's moods, at predicting the storms of his temper. But lately, the storms had been coming more frequently, with less warning. Thomas would be ashamed of what you've become, she said before she could stop herself. The silence that followed was deafening. Martha immediately regretted her words, knowing they would only feed the rage that simmered constantly beneath her son's surface. What did you just say to me? Dean's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper she'd come to fear more than his. Shouts. Nothing. She backtracked quickly. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. The sound of his fist hitting the table made her jump. Dad would be ashamed. Dad would be ashamed. His voice rose with each word. Dad isn't here anymore. He left us with nothing but debt and this worthless piece of land. And then you had to go and get yourself blinded, becoming another burden I have to carry. Martha heard the scrape of his chair as he stood. She instinctively backed away, her hands finding the counter behind her. Dean, please. I didn't mean. You never mean it, do you? Never mean to be such a useless weight around my neck. Never mean to remind me every day that I'm stuck here taking care of a blind old woman instead of living my own life. His footsteps came closer, and Martha felt her heart hammering against her ribs. This was the moment she dreaded every day. When words turned to fists, when her son's frustration found its release in her pain. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'm sorry, she whispered again, the words worn smooth from overuse. The first blow caught her across the cheek, snapping her head to the side. Pain bloomed hot and immediate, but she didn't cry out. Experience had taught her that sound only encouraged him, only fed whatever dark satisfaction he found in her suffering. Sorry doesn't fix anything, Dean growled, grabbing her arm with bruising force. Sorry doesn't give me back the life I could have had. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows of the small farmhouse. The sound reminded Martha of bones, dry, brittle things that might snap at any moment. Like her spirit, she sometimes feared. The nearest neighbors, the Johnsons, lived 3 miles down the road. Good people who kept to themselves and asked no uncomfortable questions about the bruises Martha could no longer see, but could feel mapping her skin like an atlas of pain. Such was a son's right, folks said. The good book spoke of honoring thy father and mother, but there were always exceptions, weren't there? Always reasons why people looked away. The afternoon wore on with its usual oppressive routine. Dean eventually left for the barn, his anger temporarily spent. Martha cleaned the kitchen, her fingers finding each dish, each surface with the precision born of necessity. Every movement was a small act of defiance. I am still here, I am still capable, I am still me. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades she could no longer see, Martha prepared a simple supper. Cornbread and beans, humble food that wouldn't provoke Dean's criticism about wasting money on luxuries they couldn't afford. She was stirring the beans when she heard it, hoofbeats approaching the farm. Not the familiar rhythm of Dean's horse returning from the fields, but something different. Steadier, more patient. Martha moved to the door, her hand finding the worn wood frame. Dean, she called toward the barn. Someone's coming. She heard her son's boots on the gravel as he emerged from the barn, his movements quick with suspicion. Dean didn't like visitors. Visitors meant questions, meant pudding on the mask of the devoted son, caring for his blind mother. Meant pretending. Stay inside, he ordered, his voice carrying across the yard. But Martha remained in the doorway, her face turned toward the sound of the approaching rider. There was something about the steady rhythm of those hoofbeats that called to her, something that felt like hope, though she'd nearly forgotten what hope felt like. The rider stopped in the yard, and Martha heard the creak of saddle leather as he dismounted. Help you? Dean's voice carried the false friendliness he used for strangers, though Martha could hear the edge beneath. Name's Liam Garrett, eh? Deep voice replied, the words wrapped in a gentle drawl that spoke of distant places. Got a bit of trouble with my wagon about 2 miles back. Wheel broke clean off. Saw your smoke and thought I might ask for some assistance. We keep to ourselves here, Dean replied, the false friendliness already fading. Johnson's place is another 3 miles down the road. They might help you. Martha felt a pang of shame at her son's rudeness. at the rejection of a stranger. In need, before she could stop herself, she called out, "We have tools here. And supper's almost ready if you're hungry, Mr. Garrett." The silence that followed was thick with Dean's anger, but Martha stood her ground. Small defiances were all she had left. "That's mighty kind, ma'am," Liam replied, his voice moving closer. "And I'd be happy to work for my meal. I'm handy with repairs, good with livestock." "Mother," Dean's voice was tight with warning as he moved to her side. "We don't need any help," but it was too late. The stranger was already approaching, his boots crunching on the gravel of the yard. Martha could sense his presence, tall and solid, bringing with him the smells of horse and leather and the wide-open spaces she'd once loved to look at. "Mrs. Sullivan, is it?" Liam asked, stopping a respectful distance away. "Martha," she replied, extending her hand in the direction of his voice. "Martha Sullivan." His hand enveloped hers, calloused and warm, the grip gentle but sure. "Pleased to meet you, Martha. Your kindness is appreciated." There was something in his voice, a quality that reminded her of Thomas in the early days, respect, genuine warmth. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her that way that she felt tears threatening behind her useless eyes. "Come in, Mr. Garrett," she said, stepping back from the doorway. "Supper isn't fancy, but it's hot." "Mother," Dean hissed, grabbing her arm roughly. "A word." He pulled her inside, his fingers digging into her flesh with familiar cruelty. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded in a harsh whisper. "Inviting strangers into our home? Have you lost your mind along with your sight?" "He needs help, Dean," Martha replied, keeping her voice low but firm. "It's the Christian thing to do." "The Christian thing?" Dean scoffed. "Since when do you care about that? You just want an audience, someone to play the poor blind woman for." The accusation stung, but Martha held her ground. "One meal. One night of shelter, then he'll be on his way." Before Dean could respond, Liam's voice came from the doorway. "If I'm causing trouble, I can move on. Don't want to come between family." There was something in his tone, a careful neutrality, that made Martha wonder if he'd heard their exchange, if he'd noted the way Dean's fingers still gripped her arm. "No trouble," Dean replied, instantly switching back to his public voice. "Just explaining to Mother that we don't have much to offer a traveler." "I don't need much," Liam said easily. "And I always pay my way. Been running cattle down from my ranch near Helena. Lost a wheel but saved the herd. Got them penned in a meadow back yonder until I can fix my wagon." "You're a rancher?" Martha asked, her interest piqued despite herself. Thomas had always dreamed of running cattle on their small farm, but they'd never had the money to expand beyond a few dairy cows and chickens. "Yes, ma'am, Garrett Ranch. Nothing fancy, but it's growing. Started with 10 head of cattle and a rundown cabin 6 years back. Up to 80 head now and a proper house." Martha could hear the pride in his voice, not boasting, but the simple satisfaction of a man who had built something with his own hands. It was refreshing after years of Dean's bitter complaints about their land, their poverty, their isolated life. "Well, sit yourself down, Mr. Garrett," she said, moving confidently to the stove. "Beans are ready, and there's cornbread too." As she served the simple meal, Martha felt more alive than she had in years. There was something about having a guest, about conversation that wasn't laced with resentment, that awakened parts of her she'd thought long dead. She found herself talking more than she had in months, asking Liam about his ranch, about the town of Helena, about his travels. Dean remained mostly silent, drinking steadily from the whiskey bottle as the evening wore on. Martha could feel his resentment growing with each passing moment, with each laugh she shared with their visitor, with each story Liam told that transported her beyond the confines of her dark world. "It's getting late," Dean finally interrupted, his words slightly slurred. "Mother needs her rest." "Of course," Liam agreed immediately. "I've imposed enough." If I could just borrow some tools in the morning, I'll be on my way. You can sleep in the barn, Dean said, not bothering to hide his rudeness now. There's clean straw in the loft. That's perfect. Thank you for your hospitality. Martha heard Liam rise from his chair, heard the gentle way he pushed it back under the table. Always thoughtful, this stranger, always careful. I'll see Mr. Garrett to the barn, she said, reaching for her shawl. I'll do it, Dean snapped. You'll just trip over something and hurt yourself. I know my way around my own farm, Dean. Martha replied, a rare edge entering her voice. I've walked to the barn thousands of times. She felt Liam's attention shift between them, felt the tension in the room thicken like cream turning to butter. I can find my own way, he offered. Diplomatically. If you'll just point me in the right direction. Nonsense, Martha said firmly, finding her walking stick where it leaned against the wall. The night air will do me good. Before Dean could object further, she moved toward the door, her steps confident on the familiar floorboards. After a moment's hesitation, she heard Liam follow her. The night embraced them as they stepped outside, cool mountain air carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Martha took a deep breath, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders now that she was away from Dean's oppressive presence. Straight ahead about 30 paces to the barn, she said, setting off with her stick gently tapping the ground before her. Mind the water trough on the right. They walked in companionable silence for a few steps before Liam spoke, his voice pitched low enough that it wouldn't carry back to the house. How long has he been hurting you, Martha? The question stopped her in her tracks. No one had ever asked so directly. No one had ever acknowledged what happened behind the closed doors of their home. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't think of how to respond to such blunt recognition of her shame. I don't know what you mean, she managed finally, the denial automatic after years of practice. Liam didn't press, but his silence was eloquent. He knew she was lying, and they both knew it. Your son has a heavy hand, he said finally, his voice gentle but matter-of-fact. And you have the movements of someone who's learned to protect herself. I recognize the signs. Martha's grip tightened on her walking stick, her knuckles whitening with the pressure. It's not what you think, she whispered, though she knew it was exactly what he thought. What I think, Liam replied carefully, is that no one deserves to live in fear, especially not in their own home. The simple truth of his words broke something open inside her, a dam that had been holding back years of pain and humiliation. Martha felt tears sliding down her cheeks, silent witnesses to her broken spirit. He wasn't always like this, she said, the words barely audible. After Thomas, my husband, died, after I lost my sight, something changed in Dean. It's like all the goodness drained out of him, replaced by something I don't recognize. Liam was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was closer, though he hadn't touched her. Loss changes people, Martha. But it doesn't give anyone the right to hurt others, especially not a son hurting his mother. Where would I go? The question escaped before she could stop. It the desperate thought that had circled in her mind during countless nights of pain and fear. What would I do? I'm blind, Mr. Garrett. I have no money, no family but Dean. There are options, he said simply. Always options for those brave enough to take them. The barn loomed before them, its familiar scent of hay and animals wrapping around Martha like an old friend. She paused at the door, suddenly reluctant to end this conversation, to return to the house where Dean waited with his whiskey and his rage. You should be careful, she warned, concern for this kind stranger overriding her own fears. Dean doesn't like interference. He has a temper. I've faced worse than angry young men, Liam replied, and Martha could hear the smile in his voice. Don't worry about me, Martha. But maybe start worrying a bit more about yourself. With those words hanging in the air between them, he gently took her hand and pressed something into her palm, a small object, cool and metallic. "What is this?" she asked, her fingers exploring its unfamiliar shape. "A whistle," he replied simply. "Silver, it was my mother's. If you need me any time, day or night, just blow it. I'll hear it." Martha closed her fingers around the whistle, the small weight of it somehow comforting. "Why would you help?" "Me? You don't even know me." "I know enough," Liam said quietly. "I know you're kind enough to feed a stranger, brave enough to walk in darkness, strong enough to endure what would break most people. That's more than enough reason to help." With those words, he stepped past her into the barn, leaving Martha standing in the cool night air with the whistle clutched in her hand like a talisman. For the first time in years, she felt something dangerous stirring in her heart. Hope. The morning broke clear and crisp, the kind of autumn day that would have once filled Martha with joy. She moved through her routine with practiced efficiency, stoking the fire, preparing breakfast, setting out Dean's clothes for the day. Every movement carefully calculated to avoid his criticism, his anger. But something had changed inside her. The conversation with Liam had awakened memories of who she had been before, not just before blindness, but before fear had become her constant companion. She found herself listening for sounds from the barn, wondering if their visitor was already awake, already working on plans to repair his wagon. Dean stumbled from his bedroom, the smell of stale whiskey following him like a shadow. "Is he gone yet?" he demanded without preamble. "I don't think so," Martha replied, placing a plate of eggs on the table. "I haven't heard him leave." Dean grunted, dropping heavily into his chair. "Sooner he's gone, the better. Don't like the way he looks at you." Martha paused in her movements. "How does he look at me?" "Like he knows something, like he's judging." Dean's fork scraped against the plate with unnecessary force. "We don't need people like that around here." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Martha felt the weight of the silver whistle in her apron pocket, where she'd hidden it before coming back to the house the night before. Its presence gave her a strange courage. "He seems like a good man," she said carefully. "Successful too. Might be useful to have connections with a prosperous rancher." Dean's laugh was ugly. "Useful? What would be useful is if you'd stop inviting trouble to our door. What would be useful is if you weren't blind and broken and hanging around my neck like a stone." The words were familiar, but today they struck Martha differently. Today, she heard them not as truth, but as the bitter complaints of a man who had chosen to blame others for his own failures. "I didn't choose blindness, Dean," she said quietly. "Just as you didn't choose to stay here and care for me. That was your decision." The silence that followed her words was dangerous. Martha could almost feel Dean's rage building like a storm. "Front, my decision?" he finally said, his voice deadly quiet. "What choice did I have? Leave my blind mother to starve? Let the bank take our land? What kind of son would that make me?" "A honest one," Martha replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "If you resent me so much, perhaps it would have been better for both of us if you had made a different choice." The blow came without warning, the back of Dean's hand connecting with her cheek, hard enough to knock her against the counter. Pain exploded across her face, and she tasted blood where her teeth had cut into her lip. "Don't you dare!" Dean snarled, grabbing her by the shoulders. "Don't you dare try to make me the villain here. Everything I've done for this family." "What family?" Martha whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. "We're not a family anymore, Dean. We're a jailer and a prisoner." His grip tightened, fingers digging into her flesh with bruising force. Martha braced herself for the next blow, for the familiar rhythm of pain that had become the soundtrack of her life. But it never came. "I'd step away from her if I were you, son." Liam's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Martha hadn't heard him enter, hadn't heard the door open, but suddenly he was there, his presence filling the small kitchen. Dean's hands dropped from her shoulders, but Martha could feel him coiled like a snake beside her, ready to strike. "This is none of your business, Garrett. This is between me and my mother. When a man puts his hands on a woman in anger, it becomes everyone's business," Liam replied, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Especially when that woman has shown me nothing but kindness, and that man nothing but contempt." Martha could sense Dean's movement as he turned to face their visitor. The air in the kitchen felt charged, dangerous, like the moment before lightning strikes. "You need to leave," Dean said. "Now, before things get ugly." "Things are already ugly," Liam observed. "And I'll leave when I'm ready. But I won't leave Martha here to suffer your temper." The sound of Dean's fist hitting the table made Martha jump. "Her name is mother to you. And she's my responsibility, not yours." "Responsibility," Liam repeated the word thoughtfully. "Interesting choice. Not family or loved one, but responsibility. Like a burden you're carrying rather than a person you cherish." Martha felt tears stinging her eyes at the simple truth of his observation. When had she become merely a responsibility to her son? When had the love between them curdled into this toxic mixture of resentment and obligation? "Get out," Dean's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Get out before I make you regret the day you rode onto our land." "Martha," Liam said, ignoring Dean's threat, "I'm heading into town to get parts for my wagon. Would you like to come with me? Get some fresh air, maybe visit with people a bit?" The invitation hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Martha's heart raced at the simple possibility of escape, even temporary. "She's not going anywhere with you," Dean snarled before she could respond. "I believe that's her decision to make," Liam replied mildly. "Martha, what do you say?" In that moment, standing in her own kitchen with the taste of blood still fresh in her mouth, Martha Sullivan faced the most terrifying choice of her life. Stay in the familiar prison of her home with the son who had become her tormentor, or step into the unknown with a stranger who had shown her more kindness in one evening than she'd known in years. The silver whistle weighed heavy in her pocket. A promise, a possibility. "I'd like that," she said finally, her voice stronger than she expected. "I'd like that very much." The silence that followed her decision was deafening. Martha could almost feel Dean's shock giving way to rage, could sense the coming explosion as clearly as she'd once been able to see storm clouds gathering on the horizon. "You're not leaving this house," he said, each word precise and deadly. "Not with him, not with anyone." "Dean," Martha said gently, reaching out to where she thought he stood. "It's just a trip to town. I'll be back by supper." Her fingers found his arm, felt the tension in his muscles. For a moment, just a moment, she thought she might have reached him, might have found a remnant of the boy she'd raised beneath the bitter man he'd become. Then he shoved her hand away with enough force to make her stumble. "You leave now, don't bother coming back. This is my house, my land. You want to run off with some stranger, you're no longer welcome here." The ultimatum hung in the air between them, a final line drawn after years of smaller boundaries crossed. Martha felt something shifting inside her, like ice breaking up on a river after a long winter. Not just fear, not just hope, but something more profound, clarity. "This was Thomas's house," she said quietly, "Thomas's land. He left it to both of us, Dean, not just to you. And he would be heartbroken to see what you've become." The truth landed like a physical blow. Martha heard Dean's sharp intake of breath, felt the sudden stillness in the room as her words found their mark. "You choose him over your own son?" Dean's voice was incredulous. "Some drifter you've known for one day over your own flesh and blood?" "I'm choosing myself," Martha replied simply. "For the first time in years, I'm choosing what's left of Martha Sullivan instead of surrendering one more piece to your anger." She turned in the direction of Liam's voice. "I need a few minutes to gather my things, if that's all right." "Take all the time you need," he replied, and she could hear the respect in his voice, the quiet approval of her courage. "I'll wait right here." As Martha made her way to her bedroom, counting steps she'd taken thousands of times before, she felt lighter than she had in years. 15 paces to her room. 7 items to pack: her brush, Thomas's picture she could no longer see but couldn't bear to leave, a change of clothes, her mother's Bible, the quilt from their marriage bed, her walking stick, and the last letter. Thomas had written her before the cancer took him. Behind her, she could hear Dean and Liam in the kitchen, their voices low but intense. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone told her enough. Dean threatening, Liam unmoved. 2 wills clashing like thunder in the mountains. But for once, the outcome didn't rest solely in her son's hands. For once, Martha Sullivan had claimed the power to choose her own path. And though that path led into uncertainty, into the unknown, it also led away from pain, away from the slow death of spirit she'd been enduring one day at a time. As she packed her small bundle, her fingers found the silver whistle in her pocket. She hadn't needed to use it after all. Hadn't needed to call for help. Because somewhere in the night, as she'd lain awake considering Liam's words, Martha had found something she thought was lost forever. Her voice. The road into town stretched before them like a ribbon of dusty promise. Martha sat beside Liam in his repaired wagon, her small bundle of possessions tucked securely under the seat. The morning sun warmed her face, and though she couldn't see the landscape rolling past, she could feel the vastness of it, the way the air changed as they moved from the sheltered valley of her farm into the wide-open plains that surrounded the town of Riverdale. "You're very quiet," Liam observed after they'd traveled for nearly an hour in companionable silence. Martha's fingers traced the outline of the silver whistle in her pocket, drawing strength from its solid presence. "I'm trying to remember the last time I left the farm," she admitted. 3 years, maybe 4, not since the accident that took my sight. "That's a long time to be confined to one place." Liam's voice carried no judgment, only understanding. "It didn't feel like confinement at first," Martha explained, finding it strangely easy to open up to this man she barely knew. "After I lost my sight, the farm felt safe, familiar. I knew where everything was, could navigate by memory and touch. The outside world seemed overwhelming. And then it became a prison," Liam finished for her. Martha nodded, surprised by the tears that sprang to her eyes. "Yes, but I didn't realize it until you arrived. Strange how you can become accustomed to almost anything, even cruelty, if it happens slowly enough." The wagon hit a rut in the road, jostling them both. Liam's hand reached out instinctively to steady her, then withdrew respectfully once she had regained her balance. "My father was like your son," he said after a moment, his voice thoughtful. "Quick with his fists, quicker with cruel words. Broke my mother's spirit long before he broke her body." Martha turned toward his voice, wishing she could see his face, read the expressions that accompanied his words. "What happened to them?" "Father drank himself to death eventually. Mother, she never recovered what he took from her. Lived like a shadow until pneumonia took her 5 winters back." There was old pain in his voice, weathered by time but never truly healed. "That's why I stopped when I saw your farm. Why I noticed the signs in you. I've seen that look before, in my mother's eyes." "I'm sorry," Martha said softly. "Don't be. Their story is over. Yours is still being written." The wagon slowed as they approached what Martha assumed must be the outskirts of town. She could hear distant voices, the sounds of commerce and life that had once been so familiar, but now seemed almost foreign. "What will happen now?" she asked, sudden anxiety gripping her at the thought of facing a world she could no longer see, people she could no longer read. "First, we get my wagon wheel properly fixed," Liam replied, practical and reassuring. "Then we find you a safe place to stay while you decide what comes next." "I have no money," Martha reminded him, the reality of her situation settling heavy on her shoulders. No skills that would be useful to anyone. Liam's laugh was warm, genuine. You underestimate yourself, Martha Sullivan. You managed a household while blind. Cooked meals that would make a chuck wagon cook envious. And you survived years with a man who would have broken most people. Those aren't small accomplishments. Before she could respond, the wagon came to a stop, and Martha heard the sounds of a busy street around them. Horses nickering, people calling greetings, the creak of other wagons passing by. "Garrett, that you?" a friendly voice called out. "Morning, Doc Miller," Liam responded. "Brought a guest to town." Martha felt herself tense as footsteps approached the wagon. It had been so long since she'd interacted with anyone besides Dean. What would people think of her? Would they see the bruises her son had left? Would they judge her for her blindness, for her failure as a mother? "Mrs. Sullivan," Liam said gently, "this is Dr. James Miller, best physician in 3 counties and an old friend." "Ma'am." The doctor's voice was kind, educated, with a subtle Eastern accent that spoke of formal training. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Martha extended her hand in the direction of his voice, feeling his firm, professional grip in return. "Dr. Miller, Mrs. Sullivan has had a difficult time recently," Liam explained, his voice dropping slightly. "I was hoping you might know of somewhere safe she could stay for a while, and perhaps take a look at some injuries she sustained." The doctor's hand tightened briefly around hers before releasing it. Martha felt her face flush with shame at having her situation so plainly stated, at being an object of pity. "Of course," Doc Miller replied without hesitation. "Mrs. Hathaway runs a boarding house just down the street. Respectable place, reasonable rates, and I'd be happy to offer my services." "I can't pay," Martha blurted out, hating the vulnerability in her voice, but needing to be honest. There was a pause, then the doctor's voice came again, gentle but firm. "Mrs. Sullivan, in my profession, one quickly learns that some debts are paid in currency, and others in the simple satisfaction of doing what's right. Please allow me the latter." Martha felt tears threatening again and blinked them back fiercely. She'd cried enough in recent years. It was time for strength, not tears. "Thank you," she managed. The next few hours passed in a blur of new experiences. The boarding house run by Mrs. Hathaway, a widow with a booming voice and kind hands, welcomed her without question. Doc Miller examined her in the privacy of her new room, his touch clinical but gentle as he cataloged the evidence of Dean's abuse. 3 ribs showing signs of previous fractures, he murmured, more to himself than to her. Significant bruising on the upper arms and back, split lip, contusion on the left cheekbone. "Will they heal?" Martha asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The physical injuries?" "Yes." The doctor's voice carried the weight of experience. "The others? Those take longer, but they can heal too, with time and proper care." After he left, promising to return the next day, Martha sat alone in the small room, her hands exploring the unfamiliar space, the narrow bed with its clean, rough sheets, the simple dresser, the chair by the window that let in afternoon sun she could feel but not see. Freedom, she realized, was a terrifying thing when you'd been captive so long. What would she do tomorrow, next week? How would she support herself? Where would she go when her welcome at the boarding house inevitably wore thin? A soft knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Mrs. Sullivan?" "It's Liam Garrett. May I come in?" "Yes," she called, smoothing her dress nervously. The door opened, and she heard his familiar tread on the wooden floor. "I've brought you some things," he said. "Necessities to tide you over. Mrs. Hathaway helped me select them." Martha heard the rustle of paper bags being set on the dresser. "That's very kind, but I can't accept." "You can and you will, Liam." Interrupted, but there was no harshness in it. "Consider it a loan if your pride demands it. You can repay me when you're on your feet again." The simple confidence in his voice, his certainty that she would indeed find her way, touched something deep inside her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, the question that had been burning inside her since he first intervened at the farm. "Why help a stranger?" She heard him settle into the chair by the window, heard the thoughtful pause before he answered. "I told you about my parents," he began. "What I didn't tell you is what came after. When I was 16, a rancher named Garrett, no relation to me then, found me sleeping in his barn. I'd run away from home after a beating that nearly killed me. Instead of running me off, he gave me work, gave me shelter, taught me everything he knew about cattle and horses and being a decent man." Liam's voice softened with memory. He and his wife had no children of their own. 3 years later, they legally adopted me, gave me their name, eventually left me their ranch when they passed. Everything I have, everything I am, came from their decision to help a stranger in need. "So you're paying forward their kindness," Martha said, understanding blooming inside her. "Trying to," he agreed. "Though I suspect Samuel Garrett would say I've still got a long way to go before the debt is squared." The simple story, told without drama or self-pity, resonated with Martha. A life transformed by unexpected kindness. A second chance granted when all hope seemed lost. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "Rest now," Liam replied, and she heard him rise from the chair. Tomorrow's soon enough to start figuring out what comes next. But as the door closed behind him, Martha knew sleep would be elusive. Her mind was too full of possibilities, of fears, of hope she'd barely allowed herself to acknowledge. For the first time in years, tomorrow wasn't just another day to endure. It was an unknown country waiting to be explored. The next morning brought a surprise visitor. Martha was just finishing the breakfast Mrs. Hathaway had brought up, fresh bread with butter and honey, eggs still warm from the hen house, when a knock came at her door. "Come in," she called, quickly wiping her mouth with a napkin. The door opened, and a woman's voice, cheerful, brisk, and unfamiliar, greeted her. "Good morning, Mrs. Sullivan. I'm Rebecca Watson from the Riverdale Herald. May I have a moment of your time?" Martha tensed. A newspaper woman? Had news of her situation already spread through town? Was she to become an object of gossip and speculation? "I'm not sure I have anything worth printing, Miss Watson," she replied cautiously. "Oh, it's Mrs. Watson, actually. And I'm not here about a story," the woman clarified, stepping further into the room. Martha heard the rustle of skirts, caught the faint scent of lavender. "Liam Garrett mentioned you might be looking for work. I need someone to help at the newspaper office. Answer the door, take dictation, that sort of thing. But I'm blind." Martha stated the obvious, confusion evident in her voice. "Yes, and I'm terrible at filing and have no patience for answering the same questions 50 times a day," Rebecca replied cheerfully. "But you have excellent hearing, a pleasant speaking voice, and from what Liam tells me, you're resourceful and intelligent. Those are the qualities I need." Martha's mind raced. A job? Independence? It seemed too good to be true. "I've never worked outside my home," she admitted. "I'm not sure I'd be adequate." "Nonsense," Rebecca dismissed her concerns with such confidence that Martha almost believed her. "You'll learn. We all do. The pay isn't much, $12 a week to start, but it includes lunch and all the coffee you can drink. $12 a week. More money than Dean had ever given her for household expenses. Enough to pay for her room at the boarding house with some left over. Enough to start building a future. "When would you want me to start?" Martha asked, hardly believing the words coming from her own mouth. "Today, if you're able," Rebecca replied promptly. "I've got a mountain of subscription notices to organize and a lead on a story about water rights that won't wait." Martha's hand went instinctively to her face, to the bruises she knew were still visible. "People will ask questions," she said quietly, "about my injuries, about why I'm in town alone." There was a brief silence, Then Rebecca's voice came again, gentler but no less determined. "Mrs. Sullivan, Martha, if I may, in my profession, I've learned that there are stories people want to tell and stories they don't. I respect both kinds. Anyone who comes to the Herald office will be instructed to do the same, or they can take their business elsewhere." The simple dignity of this offer, work without judgment, respect without invasive questions, brought a lump to Martha's throat. "Then I accept," she said, rising from her chair. "Just let me get my shawl." The newspaper office was only a short walk from the boarding house. Rebecca offered her arm, guiding Martha with quiet descriptions of their surroundings. 3 steps up to the boardwalk. Doorway on your right. Careful of the loose board here. By the time they reached the Herald, Martha had a clear mental picture of the route, confident she could navigate it alone after a few more journeys. The office itself was a revelation. A busy, cluttered space filled with the rhythmic clacking of the printing press in the back room, the smell of ink and paper, the constant rustle of people coming and going with news, advertisements, and curiosity. "This is your desk," Rebecca explained, guiding Martha's hands to a small table near the front door. "When people come in, you'll greet them, find out what they need, and either handle it yourself or direct them to me. There's a bell here," she placed Martha's fingers on a small brass bell, "that you can ring if you need assistance." "What about taking dictation?" Martha asked, her fingers exploring the desk's surface, memorizing its dimensions and contents. "Ah, yes, I've got something special for that." Rebecca moved away briefly, then returned. Martha heard the sound of something being placed on the desk. "It's a typewriting machine." "Have you ever used one?" "No," Martha admitted, her hands hovering uncertainly over what felt like an intricate metal contraption. "It's quite simple once you get the hang of it," Rebecca assured her. "The keys are arranged in rows. When you press one, it strikes an inked ribbon and leaves a mark on the paper. With practice, you'll be able to type without seeing the keys." Martha's heart sank. How could she possibly learn such a complex skill without sight? Her doubt must have shown on her face, because Rebecca's hand came to rest gently on her shoulder. "My husband was blinded in the war," she said quietly. "He taught himself to use the typewriter by feel. Said it gave him back his voice when he thought it was lost forever. If William could do it, so can you." The revelation changed everything. Rebecca wasn't offering charity to a pitiful blind woman. She was offering an opportunity, based on her own experience with what the blind could achieve. "I'd like to try," Martha said, new determination filling her voice. The days that followed established a routine that gradually began to feel like a new kind of normal. Martha would rise early, dress carefully in one of the 2 dresses Mrs. Hathaway had helped her purchase with her first week's wages, and make her way to the Herald office. There, she would greet visitors, learn to operate the typewriter, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence, and absorb the rhythms and news of a town she was coming to know through voices and stories rather than sight. In the evenings, she would often find Liam waiting to walk her back to the boarding house. His visits to town had become more frequent, his cattle business apparently requiring regular attention at the general store, the bank, and wherever else Martha happened to be. "You don't have to check on me every day," she told him one evening. As they walked slowly along the boardwalk, her hand resting lightly on his arm for guidance. "I'm managing quite well." "I know you are," he replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Maybe I just enjoy your company." The simple statement sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the mild spring evening. It had been so long since anyone had valued her company, had sought her out not from obligation but from genuine desire. "How is your son?" Liam asked carefully, changing the subject. Martha sighed. Dean had been a shadow at the edges of her thoughts, a mix of worry and fear she couldn't quite dispel despite the growing happiness in her new life. "I don't know," she admitted. "I haven't heard from him since I left. Rebecca says there are rumors he's drinking heavily, neglecting the farm." Do you want to go back, try to help him? Liam's question held no judgment, only genuine concern for what she wanted. Martha considered the question seriously, as she had many times in the quiet hours of night. No, she said finally. I can't. Save Dean from himself. I tried for years, and it nearly destroyed us both. He has to find his own way now, just as I'm finding mine. Liam's arm tightened briefly beneath her hand, a gesture of understanding and support. That's a hard truth to accept, but a necessary one. They walked in companionable silence for a few more steps before Liam spoke again. I have to return to my ranch tomorrow. Been away too long already. My foreman is capable, but there's spring calving to oversee, fences to mend after the winter. Of course, Martha replied, ignoring the pang of disappointment that shot through her. You have responsibilities. I do, he agreed, but I was wondering, would you consider coming with me? Not permanently, he added quickly. Just a visit, a few days away from town. The ranch house has plenty of room, and my housekeeper Mrs. Flores would be there as chaperone, so your reputation would be safe. The invitation caught Martha completely off guard. Leave Riverdale? Journey to a place she'd never been, couldn't see, couldn't navigate from memory? I don't know, she hesitated. The newspaper, Rebecca already said she can spare you for a week. Liam interrupted, a hint of sheepishness in his voice. I might have asked her first, to make sure. Martha couldn't help but laugh at his admission. Very presumptuous. Of you, Mr. Garrett. Hopeful, he corrected gently. Just hopeful. Something in his tone made Martha's heart beat faster. This wasn't just an invitation for a country visit. It was something more, a step toward a future she'd hardly dared to imagine. Yes, she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Yes, I'd like that very much. The journey to Garrett Ranch took the better part of a day. Martha sat beside Liam in his wagon, listening as he described the changing landscape around them, the way the flat farmland gave way to rolling hills, the stands of pine that marked the approach to the mountains, the winding creek that bordered his property. It sounds beautiful, she said wistfully. It is, he agreed. But beauty isn't just something you see, Martha. It's something you feel, something you sense. The way the air changes as the sun sets. The sound of aspen leaves trembling in the fa breeze. The smell of pine after rain. You don't need eyes to appreciate those things. His words touched her deeply. Dean had treated her blindness as the end of everything worthwhile, a tragedy that defined her entire existence. Liam saw it differently, not as the absence of one sense, but as an opportunity to experience the world through the others. We're home, he announced finally, as the wagon turned onto what felt like a smoother road. Coming up to the main house now. Martha heard dogs barking, then voices calling greetings. The wagon came to a stop, and Liam jumped down, coming around to help her descend. Benvenida, Signora, a woman's warm voice greeted her as her feet touched solid ground. Welcome to Garrett Ranch. I am Alina Flores, the housekeeper. Thank you for having me, Martha replied, extending her hand. Alina's grip was strong, her skin roughened by work, but gentle in its touch. It is my pleasure. The house has been too quiet since the patron's parents passed. It is good to have a woman's presence again. Liam guided Martha up what felt like broad wooden steps onto a porch that wrapped around the house. It's not fancy, he told her, a touch of uncertainty in his voice, but it's solid. Built it myself with help from the ranch hands. Inside, Martha's fingers trailed over sturdy furniture, touched walls made of smooth logs, felt the warmth of a stone fireplace at the center of what must be the main room. Everywhere was evidence of careful craftsmanship, of a home built with patience and pride. It's wonderful, she said sincerely, understanding now why he'd wanted her to experience this place. It wasn't just a ranch, it was the physical manifestation of the life he'd built from nothing, the second chance he'd been given by the kindness of strangers. The days that followed were among the happiest Martha could remember. Elena proved to be not just an excellent cook and housekeeper, but a friend who taught Martha how to navigate the ranch house by memory, who described colors and vistas in such vivid terms that Martha could almost see them, who shared stories of her own journey from Mexico to Montana with humor and wisdom. Liam took her riding on a gentle mare, her body cradled securely against his as they explored the boundaries of his land. He taught her to identify birds by their calls, trees by the texture of their bark, wildflowers by their scent. In the evenings, they sat on the porch as he read aloud from books she'd never had the chance to enjoy, poetry and history and adventure tales that transported her far beyond the confines of her darkened world. On the fifth day, as they sat watching, or in Martha's case, listening to, the sunset, Liam took her hand in his. "I have something to ask you," he said, his usually confident voice touched with nervousness. "Something I've been wanting to ask. Since that first night at your farm, though I know it's too soon, probably foolish." Martha's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. "Ask," she encouraged softly. "I'm not a poetic man," he began. "Not educated or sophisticated. Just a rancher who's been given more chances than he probably deserved. But I know what matters in this life: kindness, honesty, courage. And you, Martha Sullivan, have more of those qualities than anyone I've ever known." His hand tightened around hers. "I'm asking if you might consider staying. Not just for a visit, but permanently, as my wife, if you do me that honor." The words hung in the air between them, filled with hope and possibility. Martha's free hand went to her face, to the scars that had faded, but would never completely disappear, visible reminders of the life she'd left behind. "Liam," she said gently, "you know what I am, blind, broken in ways that may never fully heal. 45 years old, with more painful memories than happy ones. Are you sure that's what you want?" "What I want," he replied, his voice steady now, "is to spend whatever years I have left with a woman who understands that happiness isn't guaranteed. It's chosen, fought for, sometimes wrested from the jaws of despair. A woman who knows the value of kindness because she's known its absence. A woman who can teach me to see beauty in ways I never considered before." He paused, then added simply, "I want you, Martha, exactly as you are." Tears spilled down Martha's cheeks, not tears of sorrow or fear, but of a joy so profound it could only be expressed in silence. She reached out, her fingers finding his face, tracing the contours of the man who had changed everything. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will. Stay, yes, I will be your wife." His arms came around her, gentle but secure, offering not just love but something she valued even more: safety. The certainty that in this embrace, no harm would ever come to her again. As the sun set over Garrett Ranch, painting the sky in colors Martha could no longer see but could imagine through Liam's descriptions, she realized that her journey had come full circle. Once she had been defined by what she had lost: her sight, her independence, her dignity. Now she would be defined by what she had found: strength she never knew she possessed, work that gave her purpose, and love that asked for nothing but her true self in return. It wasn't the end of her story. In many ways, it was just the beginning. But as Liam's lips found hers in a kiss that promised a future brighter than any she could have imagined, Martha Sullivan knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them not in darkness, but in light. The news of Martha Sullivan's engagement to Liam Garrett spread through Riverdale like wildfire, igniting conversations in the general store, the saloon, and after Sunday services. Most townspeople greeted the announcement with genuine pleasure. Martha had become a respected figure at the Herald office, her quiet competence and gentle manner winning friends despite her initial reluctance to share her story. Never seen Garrett look so happy, Sheriff Tom Wilson remarked to Doc Miller as they shared their customary Saturday chess game on the doctor's porch. "Man's been alone too long." "They both have," the doctor replied, moving his knight with deliberate care. "Some wounds need more than medicine to heal properly. They need purpose, community, love." Only Rebecca Watson, perhaps Martha's closest friend in town, expressed reservation, not about the match itself, but about its timing. "Are you certain, Martha?" she asked one afternoon as they worked together in the quiet newspaper office. "It's been less than 3 months since you left your farm, your son. That's not much time to find your footing as an independent woman before becoming a wife again." Martha's fingers paused on the typewriter keys, considering her friend's concern. "If this were an ordinary courtship, I'd agree with you," she said finally. "But nothing about my relationship with Liam has been ordinary. He didn't rescue me so he could possess me. He helped me find the courage to rescue myself." She resumed typing, the steady click of the keys punctuating her thoughts. "Besides, I'm not the same woman who left that farm. I won't ever go back to being someone who accepts cruelty as her due." Rebecca's hand came to rest briefly on her shoulder, a gesture of support that had become familiar over their weeks of working together. "Then I'm happy for you, truly." Martha smiled, her face turning toward her friend's voice. "You'll come to the wedding?" "It will be small, just at the ranch with a few close friends." "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Rebecca assured. William too. He's eager to meet the woman who's mastered his beloved typewriter in record time." The mention of Rebecca's blind husband brought another thought to Martha's mind. "Rebecca, there's something I've been meaning to ask you about Dean." The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly. The name of Martha's son still carried weight, still evoked the shadow of painful memories. "What about him?" Rebecca asked carefully. "There have been rumors," Martha said, her hands folding in her lap, "about his drinking getting worse, about the farm falling into disrepair. I was wondering, has anyone checked on him recently?" Rebecca sighed, and Martha heard her settle into the chair beside the desk. "Sheriff Wilson rode out there last week, after complaints from neighboring farms about cattle breaking through. Fences, crops being trampled," he said. She hesitated. "Please," Martha urged. "I need to know." "He said the place looks abandoned. The house is standing, but there's no sign of regular care. Fields untended, livestock thin. Dean himself was not well, drunk at midday, belligerent when questioned. The sheriff suggested he might want to consider selling before he loses everything." The news settled heavy in Martha's chest. Not a surprise exactly, but a confirmation of fears she'd carried since leaving. Dean had always been susceptible to self-destruction when faced with challenges. Without her there to absorb his anger, to maintain the farm despite his neglect, the downward spiral had accelerated. "I should go see him," she said quietly. "Martha." "No." Rebecca's voice was sharp with concern. "After what he did to you, I'm not going back to stay," Martha clarified. "Not going back to the old patterns. But he's still my son, Rebecca. Whatever he's become, whatever pain he's caused, I carried him under my heart for 9 months. I can't just pretend he doesn't exist. And if he hurts you again," Rebecca challenged, "if he lashes out the way he always has?" Martha's hand went instinctively to the silver whistle she still carried in her pocket, a talisman that had come to represent not just physical safety, but the moment she'd chosen courage over fear. "I'm not the same woman who left that farm," she repeated firmly, "and I won't be going alone." The next day found Martha and Liam in his wagon once more, traveling the familiar road to the Sullivan farm. Martha sat straight-backed beside him, her face turned toward the wind, her hands folded calmly in her lap. But beneath that calm exterior, anxiety churned like creek water over stones. "We don't have to do this," Liam reminded her gently as they approached the turnoff to the farm. "You've sent the letter offering him help if he wants it. That's more than many would do after what he put you through." I know, Martha acknowledged, but a letter isn't enough. I need to speak to him face to face, or as close as I can. She added with the touch of wry humor that had begun to emerge in recent weeks. I need him to understand that this isn't about punishment or abandonment. It's about both of us finding better paths forward. Liam's hand covered hers briefly, a gesture that conveyed more than words could. They had discussed this journey at length, its purpose, its risks, its potential outcomes. Like everything else in their relationship, the decision had been reached. Together, with mutual respect for each other's concerns and wishes. As they turned onto the rutted drive that led to the farmhouse, Martha felt the change immediately. The air seemed heavier here, charged with memories both painful and precious. This land had been her home for over 20 years. She had raised her son here, buried her husband here, lost her sight here. Its contours were mapped in her mind more precisely than any place on earth. How bad is it? She asked as the wagon slowed. Liam's hesitation told her more than his eventual words. The fields are overgrown. Fences down in places. The barn roof needs repair. And the house? Standing, he said simply, but neglected. Windows broken on the north side. Porch sagging. The physical deterioration of her former home struck Martha as a fitting external manifestation of what had been happening inside those walls for years before she left. A slow decay of spirit, of relationship, of basic human kindness. The wagon came to a stop in the yard. For a moment, neither of them moved or spoke. Then Martha heard it, the creak of the front door opening, the heavy tread of familiar boots on the porch boards. What do you want? Dean's voice came harsh across the yard, slurred with what might be drink or exhaustion or both. Come to gloat over what you've done? Martha felt Liam tense beside her, ready to defend her if necessary. She placed a restraining hand on his arm, then turned toward her son's voice. Hello, Dean, she said quietly. We've come to talk, that's all. We. Dean spat the word. You and your rancher, the happy couple. Town's been talking about nothing else for weeks. May we come inside? Martha asked, ignoring the bitterness in his tone. A harsh laugh. My house isn't fit for fine company anymore. But then, you'd know that if you hadn't abandoned it. Abandoned me. The accusation hung in the air between them, the same guilt trip Dean had wielded so effectively for years. But this time, it didn't land as he intended. This time, Martha had the perspective to see it for what it was. Manipulation, not truth. I left an abusive situation, she corrected gently. There's a difference. Silence followed her words, stretching long enough that Martha wondered if Dean had walked away. Then she heard the shuffle of his boots, coming closer to the wagon. You look different, he said finally, his voice holding a note of confusion. That pierced Martha's heart more effectively than his anger had. Something's changed. Many things have changed, she agreed. For both of us, it seems. Liam helped her down from the wagon, his movements careful but not overprotective. They followed Dean into the house, Martha's cane tapping lightly before her as she navigated the familiar path from yard to porch to doorway. The smell hit her first, stale whiskey, unwashed clothes, the musty odor of a house closed too long against fresh air. Then the emptiness, fewer footsteps echoed on the fun way. Floorboards, suggesting furniture had been sold or broken. The home she had maintained with such care, even after blindness made every task more challenging, had become little more than a shell. You want coffee? Dean asked, the question awkward, as if he'd forgotten the basic rituals of hospitality. Yes, please, Martha replied, equally awkward in this new dynamic where she was visitor rather than caretaker. She heard him moving around the kitchen, clumsy, inefficient sounds that told her he had not adapted well to handling domestic tasks. A cup clattered against the stove. Water splashed on the floor. Dean cursed under his breath. Let me, she offered, moving confidently toward the familiar space. I still remember where everything is." "Suit yourself," Dean muttered, stepping aside. Martha's hands found the coffee pot, the stove, the cups with practiced ease. As she worked, she sensed Liam and Dean watching her, one with pride, the other with something more complex. "You really can manage on your own," Dean said finally, surprise evident in his voice. "I always thought that I needed you to survive." Martha finished for him, setting the pot on the stove to boil. "I thought so too for a long time. It was easier than admitting the truth, which is that I stayed because I was afraid, because I believed I deserved what was happening to me, because I'd forgotten there were other ways to live." The coffee began to bubble, filling the kitchen with a scent that briefly overpowered the stale odors of neglect. Martha poured 3 cups with steady hands, passing them to the men without spilling a drop. "Show off," Dean muttered, but there was no real heat in it. They settled at the kitchen table, the same table where so many painful scenes had played out over the years. Martha traced its edge with her fingertips, feeling new gouges, new scars in the wood that matched the deterioration of the man sitting across from her. "Why did you come?" Dean asked finally. "Really?" Martha wrapped her hands around the warm cup, drawing strength from its solid presence. "Because I'm worried about you. Because despite everything, you're still my son. And because I'm getting married next month, and I wanted you to hear it from me directly." A sharp intake of breath, then the sound of Dean's cup hitting the table too hard, liquid sloshing over the rim. "Married. To him, I suppose. Not a question." "Yes, Martha." "Confirmed. To Liam. And you came to invite me to the wedding, is that it? One big happy family?" The bitterness was back, sharp as a blade. "I came," Martha said carefully, "to offer you a choice. The same kind of choice Liam offered me the night he arrived at our door. A chance to step onto a different path." "What kind of choice?" "Suspicion," laced Dean's words. Liam spoke for the first time since entering the house. "The farm is failing. You know it. We know it. Sheriff Wilson knows it. At this rate, you'll lose everything by winter. And you've come to buy me out, is that it?" Dean's voice rose. "Swoop in and take what's left of the Sullivan land to add to your precious ranch." "No," Martha interrupted firmly. "We've come to offer you a job, room and board at the ranch. Honest work for fair pay. A chance to start over." The silence that followed was absolute. Martha could almost feel the shock emanating from her son, could picture the disbelief that must be written across his face. "You can't be serious," he finally managed. "After what happened between us, you want me to come work for your new husband? Live under his roof?" "Our roof," Martha corrected. "And yes, that's exactly what we're offering. Not because we've forgotten the past, but because we believe in the possibility of a different future. Why would you do this?" Dean's voice had lost its edge, genuine confusion replacing anger. "Why would either of you want me around?" It was Liam who answered, his deep voice steady and sure. "Because your mother believes there's still good in you, buried under all that pain and anger. And because I've seen enough broken men put themselves back together to know it's possible with the right support and the right motivation." "And if I refuse?" Dean asked. "If I tell you both to go to hell and keep trying to make it on my own?" "Then we'll respect your decision," Martha said simply. "The offer remains open if you change your mind." "But Dean," her voice softened with the maternal concern she'd never quite been able to extinguish, "you can't continue as you are. You know that. This place is killing you slowly, just as surely as the drinking is." Another long silence filled the kitchen. Martha wished, not for the first time, that she could see her son's face, read the emotions playing across features she knew as well as her own once had been. Was he angry? Considering? Dismissive? "I need time," he said finally, his voice rough, with some emotion Martha couldn't quite identify. "To think about it." "Of course," she agreed, relief washing through her that he hadn't rejected the offer outright. "We'll be at the ranch when you decide." They finished their coffee in a silence less tense than before, though far from comfortable. As they prepared to leave, Martha reached out, her hand finding Dean's arm with unerring accuracy born of maternal instinct. "Whatever you decide," she said softly, "know that I forgive you, Dean, not because what happened was acceptable. It wasn't, not because the past doesn't matter, it does, but because holding on to anger and hurt only continues the cycle that's brought us both so much pain." Dean's arm stiffened under her touch, then gradually relaxed. He didn't respond verbally, but he didn't pull away either. It was, Martha reflected as Liam helped her back into the wagon, perhaps the most positive interaction they'd had in years. As they drove away from the farm, Liam reached over and took her hand. "You did well," he said simply. "Do you think he'll come?" Martha asked, turning her face toward the spring breeze that carried the scent of wild lupin and fresh earth. "I don't know," Liam admitted. "That kind of change doesn't come easy to a man. Requires admitting you've been wrong, that the story you've been telling yourself about your life isn't the whole truth. Some men can't face that. But some can," Martha said softly, thinking of Liam's own journey from abused son to respected rancher, from solitary survivor to man capable of deep and generous love. "Some can," he agreed. "All we can do is offer the chance and hope he finds the courage to take it." The wedding took place on a perfect June morning, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows around Garrett Ranch and birdsong providing nature's blessing on the union. Martha wore a gown of pale blue silk that Rebecca had helped her select, her silver-streaked dark hair arranged in a simple crown adorned with fresh blossoms. "You look beautiful," Elena told her as she made final adjustments to the dress, "like a queen from an old story." Martha smiled, her fingers tracing the delicate fabric. "A queen who can't see her own kingdom," she joked gently. "But who rules?" "It wisely nonetheless," Elena responded with characteristic wisdom. "Beauty is not just for eyes, Signora. The patron sees your true beauty, your courage, your kindness, your strength. These things shine brighter than any gown." The ceremony itself was simple but profound. Judge Harrison from Riverdale officiated, his sonorous voice carrying across the ranch yard where chairs had been arranged for the small gathering of friends and ranch hands. Rebecca and William Watson were there, along with Doc Miller, sheriff, Wilson, Mrs. Hathaway, and several townspeople who had become part of Martha's expanding circle. Dean was not among them. Though Martha had held out hope until the last minute, the empty chair they'd reserved for him remained a silent reminder of choices not yet made, bridges not yet crossed. As she stood beside Liam, repeating vows that felt entirely different from those she'd spoken to Thomas so many years ago, Martha reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The path had been harder than anyone should have to travel, marked by loss, pain, and betrayal. But it had also led to this, to love freely given and received, to community, to purpose, to joy reclaimed from the ashes of despair. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Harrison declared, his words followed by a cheer from the assembled guests. Liam's kiss was gentle but sure, a promise of partnership rather than possession. Martha leaned into his embrace, surrounded by the sounds of celebration, the scent of summer, and the warmth of belonging. The reception that followed was a proper Montana affair, tables laden with food prepared by Elena and the ranch cook. Fiddle music provided by two of the hands, dancing on the smooth planked porch that wrapped around the main house. Martha found herself passed from partner to partner, whirling in careful circles with the sheriff, with Doc Miller, with William Watson, who moved with the precise confidence of someone who had learned to navigate the world without sight. "We blind folks have to stick together," he told her with a laugh as he guided her flawlessly through a waltz. "Rebecca says you've mastered the typewriter faster than she's ever seen." "Your wife is too kind," Martha demurred. "I'm still painfully Slow compared to her. But improving every day, I'll wager, William replied. That's the secret, not comparing yourself to others, but to where you were yesterday, last week, last month. Measured that way, your progress becomes something to celebrate rather than criticize. The wisdom in his words struck Martha deeply. How different would her life have been if she'd applied that principle earlier? If she'd celebrated her adaptations to blindness rather than focusing on what was lost? If she'd measured Dean's behavior not against some idealized standard of filial devotion, but against basic human decency? As the afternoon waned toward evening, Martha found a quiet moment to slip away from the festivities. She made her way carefully to the small bench beneath the old cottonwood tree at the edge of the yard, a spot Liam had shown her during one of their many walks around the property. Here, the sounds of celebration were muted, allowing her to gather her thoughts and emotions after the intensity of the day. She was so focused on the gentle rustle of leaves above her that she didn't hear the approaching footsteps until they were quite close. Heavy boots on packed earth, a familiar gait that made her heart skip a beat. "Mother?" Dean's voice came, uncertain, tentative in a way she'd never heard before. Martha straightened on the bench, turning toward his voice. "Dean, you came." "Too late for the ceremony," he said, the words carrying a note of apology. Wasn't sure I should." "Sit with me," she invited, patting the bench beside her. The wood creaked as he settled his weight next to her. Martha caught the scent of soap and clean clothes, not whiskey, not unwashed skin. A small change, but significant. "You look good," he said awkwardly. "Happy." "I am," she confirmed simply. "Happier than I thought possible." They sat in silence for a moment, the space between them filled with unspoken words, with history both shared and divergent. "I've been thinking," Dean said finally, "about your offer. About the ranch job." Martha kept her face carefully neutral, not wanting to influence his decision with her own hopes or fears. "And I sold the farm," he announced abruptly. "To the Johnsons. They're expanding their operation, needed the extra acreage. Got a fair price, all things considered." "Oh," Martha said, genuinely surprised. That's a big decision." "Biggest I've made in years," Dean agreed. "Maybe the first real decision I've made since Dad died. Everything else was just reacting, drowning, blaming." His honesty caught her off guard. This was not the Dean she'd left behind, defensive, angry, quick to lash out. This was someone new, or perhaps someone very old, the son she'd glimpsed occasionally beneath the layers of bitterness and rage. "What will you do now?" she asked carefully. Dean took a deep breath, released it slowly. "That depends on whether the job offer still stands, whether you and Garrett can stand having me around while I figure out who I might be, without all that anger eating me alive." Martha's hand found his, resting briefly on scarred knuckles that had once been weapons against her. "The offer stands," she said quietly. "But there are conditions, Dean, non-negotiable ones." "I figured as much," he replied, no resentment in his tone. "Sobriety, I'm guessing, no violence." "Yes," Martha confirmed. "And something else, perhaps harder. You'll need to truly see me, Dean, not as an extension of yourself, not as a responsibility or a burden, but as a person in my own right, with dignity, with choices, with a life that's mine to direct." "I'm not sure I know how to do that," he admitted, the rawness in his voice revealing how difficult this conversation was for him. "Not sure I know how to be different." "None of us do at first," Martha said gently. "We learn by trying, by failing, by trying again." From the direction of the main house came the sound of music, a slow, sweet melody that carried on the evening air. Martha could hear laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses. Her wedding celebration continuing. Without her, but not for long. "I should get back," she said, rising from the bench. "Liam will be wondering where I've gone." Dean stood as well, his movements uncertain. Should I come with you? Or would that just complicate things? Martha considered the question seriously. This was her wedding day, a celebration of new beginnings, of hope restored, of love found against all odds. Would Dean's presence cast a shadow over that joy? Or would it represent another kind of healing, another bridge crossed? Come, she decided, extending her hand. Meet your new family properly. Start as you mean to go on. As they walked toward the lights and music of the celebration, Martha felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Not completely, perhaps never completely, but enough to stand straighter, to breathe more freely. The past could not be undone. The scars would not disappear, but the future stretched before her with possibilities she had once thought forever beyond her reach. The Montana sky above them deepened toward evening, stars appearing one by one in the vast expanse. Martha couldn't see them, but she knew they were there, constant, enduring, their light traveling across unimaginable distances to touch the earth below. Like hope, she thought, like second chances, like the quiet miracle of ordinary lives transformed by extraordinary courage. As they reached the edge of the gathering, Liam spotted them. Martha heard his steps approaching, felt his presence before. He spoke. "Dean," he said simply, his voice neither welcoming nor rejecting, waiting, assessing. "Mr. Garrett," Dean replied, formal but not hostile. "Congratulations on your marriage." A pause, heavy with potential, with choices yet to be made. Then Liam's voice again, deliberate and clear. "Thank you. And welcome to Garrett Ranch. Elena will show you to the bunkhouse when you're ready. Work starts at dawn." Simple words, ordinary words. But in them, Martha heard the same gift Liam had once offered her, not absolution or forgetfulness, but the chance to build something new from the rubble of what had been destroyed. The opportunity to become more than the sum of past mistakes. As music swirled around them and lantern light painted the gathering in warm gold, Martha stood between her husband and her son, not trapped this time, but connecting. A bridge between past and future, between pain and possibility, between darkness and light. The work of healing had only just begun. The journey ahead would have its own challenges, its own moments of doubt and difficulty. But for the first time in years, Martha Sullivan Garrett believed in the path she was walking, a path illuminated not by sight, but by courage, by community, and by the quiet certainty that from even the deepest darkness, new light could emerge. The seasons turned with rhythmic certainty, summer giving way to autumn's fiery display, then to winter's crystalline beauty. Martha's first year at Garrett Ranch unfolded in a series of discoveries. The way the house creaked differently as temperatures dropped, how the ranch hands' boots sounded heavier on the porch when snow clung to them, the distinctive scent of pine smoke that permeated everything during the coldest months. Through it all, she continued her work at the Riverdale Herald, traveling into town 3 days each week with Liam or one of the trusted ranch hands. Her fingers flew across the typewriter keys now, transcribing stories, letters, and advertisements with growing confidence. Rebecca had even begun to trust her with simple editing tasks, reading articles aloud for Martha to assess for clarity and tone. "You have a natural ear for language," Rebecca told her one snowy afternoon as they worked together in the warm newspaper office. "You hear what works and what doesn't." "Perhaps blindness has its advantages," Martha replied with the gentle, self-deprecating humor she'd developed. "When you can't be distracted by what's on the page, you focus entirely on how the words sound, how they flow together." Dean's integration into ranch life had been more challenging, as they'd all expected. The first month tested everyone's patience, Dean's most of all. Accustomed to answering to no one, he chafed under the structure of ranch work, the clear expectations, the firm boundaries Liam established from the beginning. "I'm not a child," he'd snapped one evening after. Liam corrected his handling of a nervous colt. "I've been working with horses since before you owned this place." Then you should know better, Liam had replied, his voice level but unyielding. That colt needs consistency and calm. You're providing neither. Martha, sitting on the porch, within earshot, had held her breath, waiting for the explosion that would have inevitably followed such a confrontation in their old life. It offered him dignity, responsibility, a place to belong without pretending the past had never happened. He's earned that chance, she said after a moment's reflection. Whether he takes it, whether he's ready for that kind of responsibility, that will be his choice to make. As it happened, Dean's choice came sooner than any of them expected. The following week brought a telegram from the sheriff in a town 50 miles west. A former partner of Liam's had died suddenly, leaving 15 prime breeding horses with no one to care for them. The widow was offering them for sale at a fair price, but they needed to be collected immediately. I'd go myself, Liam told Martha as they discussed the situation over breakfast, but I can't leave now. We've got buyers coming from Wyoming Territory tomorrow, and the contracts for the new house need finalizing. Send Dean, Martha said with sudden clarity. Send him with Miguel and Joe. He knows horses better than anyone, and he'll negotiate fairly with the widow. Liam considered the suggestion, turning it over carefully in his mind. It would mean trusting him with a considerable sum of money, with decisions that could affect the ranch's future, with representing the Garrett name. To strangers, yes, Martha acknowledged. It would mean trusting him. The weight of that trust hung in the air between them, not just a practical business decision, but a moral one, a statement about who they believed Dean was becoming rather than who he had been. All right, Liam decided. I'll speak with him. This morning, Dean received the assignment with a shock that gradually gave way to quiet determination. Martha, sitting at the kitchen table as Liam explained the task, heard the change in her son's breathing, the subtle shift in his posture, conveyed through the creak of floorboards beneath his feet. I won't let you down, he said simply when Liam finished. Either of you. They departed that same afternoon, Dean riding his favorite gelding with Miguel and Joe flanking him, leading packhorses laden with supplies for the journey. Martha stood on the porch, listening to the sounds of their departure, hoofbeats fading into distance, men's voices calling final instructions, the jingle of tack and the creak of leather. He'll be fine, Liam assured her, his arm around her waist as the sounds disappeared entirely. Miguel and Joe are solid men. They'll keep him on track if he falters. It's not Dean I'm worried about, Martha admitted. It's everyone else. The world can be cruel to men seeking redemption, quick to remind them of past failures, slow to acknowledge change. Liam's silence told her he understood her concern all too well. His own journey from abused son to respected rancher had taught him how fragile new beginnings could be, how easily old patterns could reassert themselves when challenged by circumstance or cruelty. All we can do is believe in the choice we've made, he said finally, and be ready to catch him if he falls, not to punish, but to help him rise again. The week that followed crawled by with agonizing slowness. Martha threw herself into her work at the Herald, into planning the new house, into helping Elena preserve the summer's bounty for the coming winter. But beneath these normal activities ran a current of anxiety she couldn't quite suppress. Had they asked too much too soon? Had they set Dean up for failure by placing such responsibility on shoulders still bowed by the weight of past mistakes? Had they risked not only money and horses, but the fragile new trust that was growing between them? On the 8th day, just as Martha was beginning to truly worry, the sound of approaching riders broke the afternoon quiet. Many riders moving at an easy pace. Not just the 3 men who had left, but a larger group, accompanied by the distinctive sound of unshod hooves. The breeding stock they'd been sent to purchase. Martha stood on the porch, her hand shading her useless eyes out of habit as she listened to the procession approach. Beside her, Liam let out a low whistle of appreciation. They did well, he murmured, Very well indeed. Those are prime animals. Every one of them. And it looks like they've picked up something extra along the way. What do you mean? Martha asked, trying to make sense of the sounds approaching the ranch yard. There's a wagon following behind, Liam explained. Driven by a woman with what looks like household goods piled high. And a child beside her, a girl, maybe 10 or 11. Before Martha could question this unexpected development, she heard Dean's voice calling out greetings to the ranch hands who had gathered to help with the new horses. His voice carried a note of confidence, of quiet pride that she hadn't heard in years, perhaps had never heard at all. Mother, Liam, Dean called as he approached the porch. We've brought back more than just horses. Martha heard him dismount, heard his boots on the steps as he came to stand before them. There was something different in his movements, in his energy, a sense of purpose that transformed him from the angry young man who had abused her, from the penitent worker seeking redemption, into someone new entirely. This is Margaret Winters, Dean said, and Martha heard a woman's lighter tread on the porch steps. Thomas Winters' widow. And her daughter Sarah. Mrs. Garrett, Mr. Garrett, a pleasant voice greeted them. Your son has told me so much about your ranch, about the community you're building here. I hope you'll forgive our unexpected arrival. Any friend of Dean's is welcome, Liam replied smoothly, though Martha could hear the question in his voice. Please come inside out of the heat. Elena will have refreshments waiting. As they moved into the house, Martha's mind raced with questions. Dean had referred to himself as their son, a term he had carefully avoided since coming to the ranch. And this woman, this widow they'd been sent to purchase horses from, had accompanied him back, bringing what sounded like all her worldly possessions. Once they were settled in the main room with cool lemonade Elena had indeed prepared, the story emerged piece by piece. Margaret Winters was not just a widow selling horses. She was a woman at a crossroads, facing the loss of her husband's small ranch to creditors, struggling to maintain their breeding operation alone. The horses you purchased were the last of our stock, she explained, her voice carrying the quiet dignity of someone who had faced hardship without surrendering to it. The sale gave me enough to pay off Thomas's debts, but not enough to start over elsewhere. I was preparing to move to Denver, to live with my sister and find work as a seamstress. But that would have been a waste, Dean interjected, his voice carrying an intensity Martha had never heard before. Margaret is a gifted horse trainer. Her eye for bloodlines, for potential, is remarkable. Those 15 horses we brought back, she raised and trained each one from a foal. Dean suggested an alternative, Margaret continued, a smile evident in her voice. He spoke of your expanding operation, of your need for someone to oversee breeding and training. He described Garrett Ranch as a place where people are given second chances, where skill and hard work matter more than past circumstances. Martha's hand found Liam's, squeezing gently as the implication of Dean's actions became clear. He hadn't just completed the task assigned to him, he had expanded upon it, seeing an opportunity that aligned perfectly with the ranch's needs while offering hope to someone facing their own difficult crossroads. We do need someone with those skills, Liam acknowledged slowly. Our breeding program is just getting established. The right guidance now could make all the difference in the years ahead. And Sarah? Martha asked gently, addressing the child who had remained silent throughout the adult conversation. What are your thoughts about moving to a new place? A small voice answered from across the room, shy but clear. I like horses, ma'am. And Dean said there might be other children nearby. That Riverdale has a proper school. Both true, Martha confirmed with a smile. The Johnson family down the road has 3 children about your age. And the school in town is excellent. I visit there often to read to the students. But you're blind, Sarah blurted out, then immediately gasped at her own forthrightness. I'm sorry, that was rude. Martha laughed, genuinely delighted by the child's honesty. Yes, I am blind. But I can still read with my fingers instead of my eyes. special books with raised letters. Perhaps I could teach you someday, if you're interested in learning. The conversation flowed more easily after that. Practicalities discussed, possibilities explored. By the time supper was served, decisions had been made. Margaret would oversee the ranch's breeding program with her own cabin near the horse barns. Sarah would attend school in town, riding in with Martha on the days she worked at the Herald. As the new arrivals were shown to the guest rooms, where they would stay until their cabin was prepared, Martha found herself alone with Dean for the first time since his return. "You did well," she said simply, reaching out to touch his arm. A gesture that once would have made her flinch with remembered pain, but now felt natural, right? "Very well indeed." Dean covered her hand with his own, his touch gentle. "I remembered something you used to say when I was small, that the measure of a person isn't in what they take, but in what they give, in how they help others carry their burdens rather than adding to them." Tears pricked behind Martha's eyes. At this evidence that some part of her early mothering had taken root, despite the dark years that followed.